Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Mediaworks Masterclass. I'm really excited to be delivering the session today in collaboration with our partner, Worldpay. We'll talk a little more about Worldpay as we go through, and I'll leave it to colleagues to introduce themselves. But today's session is really going to focus on easy for me to say, AI first world. Are you ready for agentic finance and e-commerce? I think it's so important that we're talking about this topic right now. And it's really interesting because I always say this on all the masterclasses that we deliver. It wouldn't be a MediaWorks masterclass in 2025 without us talking about AI in some way, shape, or form. And I think today we're going to get into really some of those really clear, practical application elements of how we actually adopt AI in a particular context, which I'm really looking forward to exploring. So, as most people know, my name's David Norris. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at MediaWorks, and I'll be hosting today's MediaWorks Masterclass. Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm non-executive director at Mediaworks, background in banking, financial service, insurance, embedded payments, finance, open banking, advise a number of organizations, and particularly now around data talent, AI and agentic AI.
Fantastic, Kevin. And not alone was it great enough that you could join us on the sofa today. Ed, would you like to introduce yourself as our special guest from Worldpay?
Thanks, David. So I'm Ed Harries, VP of e-commerce at Worldpay. So I'm responsible for everything to do with digital payments and our digital payment products for SMB merchants. So that's merchants doing up to around about 50, 60 million of CTO in the UK and in the Republic of Ireland. So looking at everything that we think about from consumer interaction of payments through to agentic AI and in between.
Fantastic. So I think most people listening would agree. We've got a great panel to talk about everything agentic finance and e-commerce today. I think the place to start for me is always around that piece around context, which is increasingly important around why does all of this matter? So I think a key element for me is with agentic AI and embedded payments scaling so rapidly, we've seen massive growth in this area over the last number of years. What's the single biggest opportunity and the biggest risk for merchants as they reshape their e-commerce strategy for, say, the next 5 years?
I think the context behind these numbers, where's the money going and where's the money coming out? Yeah. So in terms of about 2/3 of the investment is going into infrastructure rather than front end at the moment, which is an important to say that this is largely at the beginning of a journey and the benefits and the investment will come. But if I look at the context of bringing this down in the real world, the first piece is probably around personalization, the payments, new storefronts, the ability to serve multi types of payment, etc. And that comes with intelligence as well. So there's a lot of money going into the data side of this, which is the value that you can get out of your data, that unified data, the tokenized data, the ability to bring that forward and identify behaviors.
And I think for me, the major thing now around why this is so relevant is that this agentic shift and the AI that's powering it, I guess, is so talked about and so topical, but it really just represents the next big shift in consumer behavior that we've seen over the last couple of decades.
Yeah.
So I think as we go through this session today, you'll start to understand how consumers are driving the change that I think businesses and merchants, service providers need to change and shift towards.
Yeah.
So yes, there's a huge amount of investment going on. We keep hearing billions and trillions going on in America, for example. But it's really driven by how consumers are interacting with digital technologies, how they're thinking about buying and consuming products and services online in a different way than they have ever done before. And we have to be able to support that and get ahead of that curve.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this yesterday. Is a client of ours was talking to me about AI bubbles and how much of a bubble did I think it is. And I think, look, that's a conversation for me, and it's probably relevant in some spaces. What I think for me in this space in particular is, as you say, this is driven by consumer behavior, which isn't going back. This is literally just gathering more and more momentum as we move forward. So this isn't something that's a flash in the pan going away. This is, as you say, something that over the next 5 years is going to only increase in prevalence.
Yeah, and that answers the second part of the question, which is the risk.
Yeah.
The risk is probably just going after it and not having your foundations of trust, ethics, frameworks, all of that in place. And making your bets wrong, choosing the wrong payment provider or the wrong partner, that whole thing, this has to be considered so that the risks is scaling too fast and going down a journey that you lose your customer.
I think that's super important. I think you've got those who want to be right at the forefront of these technological changes, and that's fine. But I think you've also got businesses, I guess, like Worldpay, where we want to be ahead and we want to continually think about the evolution of technologies, how that behavior is changing with consumers, but also be able to support businesses in a considered, sympathetic way that allows them to keep operating at the best of their ability without being distracted by technology. And I think there's a fine balance to be got there. Yes, you've always got those. We were talking about this device earlier, which we'll get onto, but you've always got those who want to be ahead with technology and think about the latest things. I'm conscious that businesses need to be able to transact and keep thriving in a ever-changing digital economy.
And I think that leads me perfectly onto an exclusive offer that we've got for all attendees today. So I think, again, we've offered a free complimentary audit and a review of payments review and AI overview. And that will really focus on working in collaboration between Mediaworks and Worldpay, focusing on what are those quick win CX optimizations to improve conversion, compliance, and accessibility recommendations. We've actually done a lot of masterclasses on compliance and accessibility and what does that look like, but that'll become part of this conversation and the reviews that we do. And then a strategic view on remaining competitive in an AI-first landscape. So I think it leads on nicely from the point you made, Kevin, around let's make sure we've got the base in place that allows us to move forward. And I think for a lot of organizations, they might be questioning where do we actually sit in that scale? Like, are we where we thought we were, or are we actually further behind? And have we got all of the bases covered? So I'm really hoping that people who are listening, people engaging with the session today, take us up on this offer, because we'd be more than happy to really go through sort of any of these elements and then feed that back and talk to prospects, customers, clients, anybody listening about what this means for them. And I think as we go through today's session, that's really a key element of, we want to talk about what does this mean for organizations. This isn't a theoretical, conceptual conversation. It's very much okay, if you're in this space, what do you need to be thinking about? Or if you're entering this space, what do you need to be thinking about?
And I would just add on to that, one of the reasons I think we're so excited to partner with people like Mediaworks is so that we can help with our technologies and our payment infrastructure, reach merchants and reach businesses who really want to take their business to the next level. What you guys do day to day, sort of at the coalface, if you like, with merchants, is all around performance, improving their businesses and supporting those businesses with technologies like Worldpay and all the other platforms that you guys use. But for me, it's about performance, and it's about how can we scale performance of businesses in really impactful ways through technology. And I think from my experience in working in payments and e-commerce and retail, too few merchants think about the impact of technology for their performance, and don't realize that very simple, subtle changes can make a massive difference to their overall conversion rates and the performance, and also the experience for their consumers and their shoppers on the front end.
Yeah, I think that is such an important element. We always talk about it being sort of that whole full funnel approach. And I think that starts with the creative, the targeting that we're doing up front from a performance perspective, right through to the channel optimizations we make. But it's then also about those integrated on-site or via mobile or via application experience, those lived experiences that's so important. And that's where we see the biggest gains here across Mediaworks, is where we really focus on that whole end-to-end piece. And I think, as I say, it's such an important element that we make this as seamless, as easy to engage with for the consumer as possible.
I agree.
So I guess key trends, for me, in simple terms, it's an interesting one, this. In simple terms, what does Agentic AI really mean for payments and finance, and how does it change what's possible for customers and merchants in e-commerce?
I think if I start here, I think the main thing for me, and we talked about this earlier on, is around what are consumers doing in the market today and how are they interacting with brands, businesses, service providers, product providers. And the shift that you're seeing is going from, let's go a decade ago, where merchants were found through a browser. Typical Google search or Bing or whatever it is. But, found on a browser, and then a very singular instance of a search driving to a merchant or a consumer to interact in a certain way. Then you had the advent of changing in consumer behavior, where they wanted to buy things through social media, or they might buy things through different channels than a merchant might expect. I think you're now getting to the point where, certainly with the advent of new browser technologies coming from all these AI providers in the market like Perplexity and OpenAI, you're getting to the point where the ability for a consumer to engage with multiple brands at a single time is what's really changing. So take a holiday, for example. If I'm buying historically, you'd have a provider package holiday to you. you now probably have the ability, or we're going to get the ability for me to be able to go into a chat bot essentially, or like a chat GPT type instance, and find a holiday that comprises of a flight, a hotel, my taxi to get there, some of the experiences that I'm going to have with my kids on holiday. And in theory, it should be able to buy all those things together and output it as one single thing to me, which is a very different contextual experience for a consumer than what they had 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think there's a big leap of faith that consumers are going to have to make to get into that mindset. And there'll be some fast movers and there'll be some people who don't really want to get into that space. But I think it's that ability to join dots digitally in a way that has never really been done before. And crucially to give, I think the big leap here is we've always had human agency. Like I've got agency to go onto a website and buy stuff myself because I have my card in front of me, or I've got my Apple Pay tokenized cards ready to go. The big shift is then being able to give technology agency to operate on our behalf. And I think this is where there's a gap, there's a cavern between us doing that and those agents. But it's happening, right? And you're seeing technology providers creating these agentic capabilities to help consumers experience things in different ways.
It's that transfer of trust, isn't it? You trust some people, you don't trust others.
Yeah.
You trust some brands, merchants, you don't trust others. So I think that when you transfer trust to an agentic relationship, let's call it a relationship.
Yeah.
That's doing the holiday experience that Ed's described. What about the fraud? What about the elements around bias? What about the things that might be built into the agentic in the same way it might be living in a human? But I think that's a really interesting transfer of trust to an agentic piece of tech and data.
And it goes back to, so we think a lot in Worldpay about how, again, back to the way that merchants would historically have been able to kind of essentially tell a shopper or consumer how they should pay for stuff, to the point where now you've got consumers choosing the methods in which they pay for stuff. So then the next sort of shift, if you like, this is sort of like payments and an e-com 3.0, which is where you've now got a piece of software, an AI agent acting on their behalf, to then go and purchase certain things. And there is that ability for, as you say, consumers have got to have trust, but merchants also on the other side of the table have got to have trust that what's buying something is inherently trustworthy and has been given enough of the sort of human agency trust signals that they can have confidence in a world that's pretty kind of rife with fraud online, certainly, that those merchants can have confidence delivering their service and their products in a way that's going to allow growth to come from that.
I think you're absolutely right, Ed. I think that authenticity, the validation, the verification, things that we as humans are innately built into our psyche, transferring that to a robot that's making those decisions to buy you the holiday, to book the restaurant, to book the hotel, confirm the taxi, all of that stuff is that is a human shift. So the merchants that win out in that payment world will be embedding those traits, if you like, into those experiences.
And I think it is. I think it's an interesting word that you used there, embedding. I think it's more about that embedded experience for me. It's about, to your point, Ed, it's about how we're pulling all of those elements together, because in their own singularity, a lot of these things have been around for a long time, but actually it's pulling them together in a way that feels embedded, feels very simple to engage with. I think it's frictionless. I think that's the interest.
You're seeing that more and more. I mean, if you think about how the web has evolved from individual services and sites and things that a consumer or even a business would consume, to now where you've got data in all sorts of different places that can be accurate, it can be inaccurate. You can have differences of opinion of different sources of data. Take a typical retailer that's got one source of truth in Google Analytics, for example, or then they've got their revenue data in their e-com platform, they've got their accounting system. You've probably got 3 different revenue numbers their merchants have got to aggregate across the board. And that is a really hard world. And that's just got more complicated over time. I think we get onto it with this. So when you look at these siloed, I guess I'd call it a sort of a legacy siloed approach to business and to consumer behavior and the way that people interact with sites, to this more joined up exercise where consumers have got a much more joined up experience, certainly online, but also businesses have got to be better and got to be smarter about how they join all these dots together. So they've got clarity. I know certainly working, and you guys will do this a lot with the businesses you work with.
Yeah.
Joining the data dots and being able to seek clarity in a world that is super complex online from all the different offline online systems you get.
Yep.
That to me is the kind of holy grail of where we need to get to.
Yep.
And we look at it here with the traditional banking sort of siloed approach. You've got, in that old school world, you've got very little fraud in terms of AI, synthetic IDs, all that sort of stuff. You've now got this AI world where you've definitely got AI fraud creation. You've also got the need to counteract AI fraud, for example, with, like, we've got fraud-sided AI, which is powered by an AI capability and uses billions of data points to then help us weed out the bad actors. But also then you've got, with the advent of more knowledge about payments and more knowledge about finance online, you've then got things like good actors behaving badly with fraud. So you've got to weed those guys out as well. Like, merchants have got a hell of a job, I think, in the new era of certainly agentic, to trust, to have confidence in the systems that they're utilizing, but also have clarity around all the data. So I think as we get into better open banking, as we get into finance that's clearer end to end, merchants should have a better time of it.
Yeah, I think as soon as it becomes almost incongruous as well, it's very difficult, I think, for consumers to engage with. And I think that, for me, has been the big step forward, where we are seeing sort of less seams in the whole process, and I think that leads us nicely onto, we talked a bit about it, but the whole notion around embedded payments and what that actually means, because I think embedded payments are transforming sort of legacy payment systems into a more seamless, scalable approach. And I guess when we're talking about commerce and e-commerce in particular, I think it's really interesting to explore what does really how does agentic AI really drive sort of secure, human-like customer experiences to really drive that growth? Because I think it's great as a saying concept, but in reality, what does this all mean?
In reality, if you look at scale, and if you look at how we've done it through core business and payments and finance, is that it's often one transaction, next transaction, next transactions, and it's a sequence. Whereas this can be like onboarding a customer, for example, scaling onboarding a customer in a consistent, persistent way that is married to the brand experience that you want to give. I can do my identity check, I can do my KYC check, I can do all the things I need to do from a payment perspective and scale that at speed. But that's just one side of it. I think that we also, so the core business services, faster, cheaper. Yeah, if you want to move into the growth, it's smarter and better. And smarter and better means then you take it away from just scaling it into personalization, tailored interactions, using context, behaviors, things that you can get out of transactional data, combined with your own data and partner data, so that you can build a much better experience. And I think that's where that engine of growth, I think that we're at the first stage.
Yep.
Faster, cheaper.
Yep.
And I think where it's smarter and better, depending on where you are as an organization.
I think smarter is the key word for me when I think about payments, certainly. So one of the big shifts that I've been trying to take some of the organization on recently is shifting from, we've got many thousands of customers who work with Worldpay day to day who have hosted payment pages, right? So that's a page that's redirected at the very bottom of a shopping journey. And as we talked about the evolution of consumer behavior online, and we've talked about how you need to reach consumers where they're sort of interacting with a brand or they're thinking about shopping and buying at that moment in time, and that sort of moment is important. We have shifted our whole thinking and our sort of evolution of product to think about how we get embedded payments at the right point in that consumer journey. And that really means that you're moving payments certainly up a funnel, if in a sort of typical retail context, so that you are reaching those consumers just at the right point in time to maximize conversion, but also give the consumer the best experience, which gives the merchant the ability to build customer lifetime value, and their business should overall thrive. So that's all about performance with embedded payments. I think what's really interesting, and we talked about this at the start, with this need for merchants to start thinking more clearly about how payments impact their business and how agentic is going to, I think, spur them on to need to think about their business more clearly. You have to get to the point where you're reaching the consumer at that right interaction point. I think gone are the days where it's good enough to have like a hosted payment page and a redirected payment page at the very bottom of the funnel, because you'll just get your customers going elsewhere. So for me, embedded is absolutely critical. It's ridden through our Worldpay e-commerce product now. We're trying to reach out to all of our existing merchants and shift them onto that Worldpay e-commerce product. And I know you guys have built that into your latest technologies. And that's where we've got to push, I think, moving forwards, because that capability to embed then also plays well into the agentic AI world as well.
And it fixes a lot of legacy, right? Is that these are orchestrated modular components, things that you can build on top of legacy. Quite often you might just leave your system the way it is and integrate through a data mesh, which means I can access the data, I can use it, make it useful, combine it. And that for me then needs seamless, frictionless, things that the customer really values. And payments is becoming really, well, it's always been important, right? But you might want to offer subscription services, variable payments, big things that would have required another interaction with the customer to make. Whereas you can offer that as part of that experience.
Yeah, and I just wanted to move us forward really into talking about trust, because I think that what we're talking about here when we're talking about things like embedded payments, etc., is it's one thing being in ChatGPT, and my wife refers to ChatGPT by a particular name. She has, I think she's befriended ChatGPT, and she'd be like, "Oh, she's done great here. She's really looked after us." And I'm like, "Who are we talking about?" So we have these conversations, but I think it's very different when it starts at, for example, discovery or search. It's very different, I think, when we talk about payment, like putting a query into a platform, whether it be ChatGPT, like any of the platforms that exist out there, is quite different in terms of then moving that step forward into things like, right, how do you embed all of those experiences? And as you said, Kevin, earlier, give the trust into the platform. So I think trust's definitely one of those. And how do you make it more human-like over this period? I think it's definitely one of the things that people are considering.
Well, and I think on trust, the challenge you have is the sort of ecosystem of digital, and the context in which people are operating now is ridden with things that undermine trust. So you only have to look in the last few months to see some of the largest brands in the retail ecosystem here having been attacked and undermined, and data being removed and so on. So I think there's a couple of things for me. I mean, one is I think you need to be able to understand very clearly, I think, an end-to-end journey. So I think from the moment that we as human beings, real human beings, give agency to a sort of chatbot or an AI LLM basically to create an agent for you, you need to be able to be clear that there's a transfer of trust at that point.
Yeah.
But I think it goes, and we talked about it earlier, going all the way through the journey towards the merchant or the person who's providing a service or something on the end of that interaction, that they have confidence that there is that path through trust right from the start. And I think until you get that clear line of sight between consumer to merchant and delivery of service or product, you'll always find it really obscure and kind of hard to understand the trust layers. It doesn't help when you've got increases in fraud and you've got to figure out through payment providers and technology providers like Worldpay how to attack that and how to address fraud. It's a really hard thing to get right. I think clarity of data, like we talked about, is going to be important. I think the ability for us to have trust that these systems can't be undermined in the way that we've seen recently, that doesn't help at all.
Have you anything to add on that trust piece?
I think it's the foundations, right? It's the foundations of every organization, every merchant, every brand, is that trust, ethics, governance, compliance, regulations, and all of that. Turn that into a positive. To be a trusted brand, you need to have principles, frameworks, values. You need to have expression of purpose, mission, whatever that looks like. And it needs to be authentic. It needs to be lived by the experience of your customer.
Yeah, it's really interesting to use that word authentic. It's one of the words that came up obviously a heck of a lot, whether it be in, leadership, etc. And we're all seeking that authenticity in a world where we are seeing less things be authentic, if you like, and potential challenges around that. But I think, again, it's interesting that it definitely seeps into how are we using things like agentic AI, and what does that authentic experience actually feel like?
I think also I would add that if you look at the choices that businesses can make every day around, the service providers they choose to work with, and the ability to interact with someone like Mediaworks, or the technology providers like Worldpay, where they're choosing to use, we're a global payments provider. We've got many thousands of employees. We can talk to Worldpay. You can interact with our technologies in a really personal way, whilst they're very advanced, I guess, in terms of their capabilities. I think merchants have got a really key role to play in this to help consumers feel like they have confidence. Obviously, there's lots of novel technologies out there. I think businesses have to be kind of clear and diligent in their approach to choosing technologies, especially in this new, quite fast evolving world. So I'm very conscious of the fact that Worldpay has got a tenure in the market. It's got a level of trust and capability that merchants can rely on.
Yeah.
And I often talk to retailers in the sense of, I don't want them to have to spend their time and their precious time delivering for their consumers, thinking about payment technology.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you have to get right in a business, especially around finance and payments, is get payments and finance right.
Yeah.
If you don't get that right and you lose trust or you're undermined with a security breach or something like that, your business is going to falter and your consumers are going to struggle.
Yeah, and I think that leads us nicely on to the points on screen now around sort of then how should businesses decide where to prioritize investments? Like, again, you've talked about it, various organizations are at different stages, etc. So what does it actually feel like in terms of how you manage that digital ecosystem?
I work with a number of clients, as you know, David.
Yeah.
And this is like a current state, if you like. Where are you on Horizon 1? Horizon 1 would be core optimization, faster, more efficient, cost savings, all about removing admin. Horizon 2 is agentic in terms of, are you planning to move the AI to agentic? And the third one is probably ecosystem. So I put those 3 horizons. And then by doing that audit, that current state assessment of where you are as an organization will determine what you do next and where to start.
And I think just to touch on that audit piece, and again, I know we talked about this at the beginning, but for anybody that does want an audit, please do sort of click on the link that's in the chat right now and book yourself in for an audit. We'd be more than happy to speak to people about what this actually looks like in their context, which I think is really important. I think, Ed, I just wanted to go into sort of an area that you touched on around performance, because ultimately organizations are looking for performance and what's going to really drive that, and how challenging in some areas measurements became. You talked about GA4 there and patching the data together, etc. So for me, it's what's the purpose of and how does sort of Worldpay and all of the payment activity and the agentic AI we've talked about, how does that link with performance?
Well, we have a sort of 4-pillar structure that we've devised in Worldpay from our digital payment products to understand how we think about payments. And the top pillar that we have is consumer obsession.
Yeah.
Right. So we think about how, yes, we sell payment products to merchants, but really those merchants are delivering value to their consumers. And so we think all the time about how do our products help consumers shop better and help them shop quicker and faster and drive more value to our merchants. So in a sense, we're sort of leapfrogging the merchant and thinking about the consumer, which is why it works well working with agencies like you guys. And that is all about performance. Because if you're thinking about that consumer interaction, that shopper behavior on the front end and where they're buying stuff, how they're interacting with the brands and the merchants that we support, whether it's a hotel or it's a bar or it's a retail brand, everything comes back to performance. And so when I think about our roadmap and looking forward to providing the best insight, I think Worldpay's got a pivotal role to play in how data comes together. We talked about this siloed approach of data that's currently in the market. When I look at finance and the accuracy of finance to determine revenue data, we talked about it earlier.
Yep.
I think where I see this going is to have a pivotal central point of data interaction for a merchant. And I think Worldpay has got a really big place to play in that.
That's really exciting. I think in terms of thinking about how you do actually link it with performance, it's so important, isn't it? Because all our clients ultimately want to talk to us about performance. It's so important that performance is driven, and there's so many opportunities in there to drive this growth. And I think, Kevin, we talk about personalization, appreciate with the last couple of minutes, but personalization and customer success massively links with sort of how AI can drive that loyalty and that growth.
Yeah, I see this through my favorite topic, and data unification.
Yeah.
I see hyper personalization and individualization of experiences, because what we're able to do now is pull the transaction data, pull in external data, take an outside perspective, as well as an inside perspective of what you're trying to deliver. And this is really about that, bringing that data to life.
Yeah, and I think that is so important, isn't it? That whole data for you. I mean, how many conversations have you and I had, Kevin, around data unification? And I'm thinking about, I've been out with 3 or 4 clients this week, and they're all talking still about this, and how do they utilize the information? Because from our perspective, from a marketing perspective, all the platforms are wanting as much data now as possible to make the AI learn as quick as possible, and you're seeing all the benefits of it.
AI and agentic starts with data, strategy, mapping, understanding, everything. That's probably the fundamental. Once you have the GRC, trust and ethics, it's all about your data.
And then I guess in terms of a practical roadmap for change then, Kevin, when we're talking about sort of adoption, we started with this actually today. We were talking about adoption, things like onboarding, then into scale. Sort of where do you see sort of this moving and heading in the future?
As an organization that I interact with often, I'd probably say 60% is in your core business. This is about focusing on what you're doing, how you're doing it. Can we use AI and Agentic? But the next one I'd be spending 30% on is Agentic. I'll be looking at now, how can we innovate? How can we make an impact? And payments and finance is a critical aspect of that. If you can't see your transactions, you can't see your financial interactions, don't start.
And I think the main thing that I would take away from this sort of thing is, as a business, thinking about the future and how you kind of grow and how you thrive in a digital market that we're seeing now, you've got to be quite sympathetic about how you incorporate AI into your business, and particularly think about it through a kind of consumer-oriented lens. At the end of the day, you guys are working with retailers and businesses and housing associations and stuff like that. You need to think about the end consumer and their experience interacting with these businesses. And I think if we can always be sympathetic about their experience on the front end and how AI impacts on their journey as a customer of these merchants and these businesses that we support, then I think we'll get this right. If we just leapfrog and think we're going to, embed some novel, crazy AI into our businesses and expect the world to sort of set on fire,
Yep.
I think we're going to all be in for a bit of trouble.
The missing 10% that I didn't, that's 60-30.
Didn't do it, Master. And I'm glad you keep me right.
So that the 10% would be really on that future roadmap.
Yeah.
Building it now. If you're not doing it now, it's too late. Your competitors would be ahead of you. They'll be choosing the right platforms, the right payment partners, the ones that align with your culture, ways of working. That whole piece starts today.
I think honestly, I was going to give a bit of a summary there, but I think that is such a fantastic way to leave it, in the sense that I hope we've given lots of people listening massive amounts of food for thought. Again, hopefully you've understood how like Worldpay and Mediaworks can support people as they go through this journey. You can see the offer that's on the screen where we do want to talk to you about your particular context. But I think there's been so much value added through the conversation today. So I'd just like to finish by saying thank you very much to yourself, Kevin, but also to you, Ed, for your input today. Honestly, it's been really fascinating, and thanks for everybody watching. And I look forward to seeing you at the next Mediaworks Masterclass. Thank you very much, everybody.